One of the great examples of this is the Gov UK website. Their rules are so clear and concise and brilliant on how much data should be on the screen. I had to order a new passport the other day, and that used to take like 20 forms, didn't it?
Yep.
It took me 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And every step was so clear and instantly available to me, as you say. Every box in the same place. They have rules on the amount of text width that can be on a page and the amount of paragraphs and things, simply to make it so that everybody can access that service.
So, welcome to episode 4 of the Tricky 2 Title podcast. Today I'm joined by Pete Dobinson. Thank you very much, Pete, for joining us. Pete's a consultant, helps organisations develop and optimise their digital learning architectures and solutions. He specialises in helping organisations to leverage AI-driven authoring tools, content authoring tools, predictive analytics, intelligent agents and conversational interfaces. There's a lot in there, Pete, to address today's challenges and future-proof talent development. So previously Pete has worked for Leo Learning, Watershed, Rusty Software, architecting the technology behind some of the world's largest learning solutions and content. So thank you very much, Pete, for joining.
Richard.
Today we're going to talk about learning standards and why they are not nerd pedantry. Pete, your language?
I said boring nerd pedantry.
Boring nerd pedantry, even more important. But before we get on to that, just briefly for anybody that hasn't watched or listened to the podcast before, there's a couple of things we do at the beginning of each episode. The first is to introduce the activity. So during the podcast, both myself and Pete will be decorating some mugs. I traditionally will continue to try and draw Dave the donkey in a slightly better light each time, and I'll talk about Dave in just a moment. Pete, you can draw whatever you want.
Nice.
It'd be nice if it had some relevance to the podcast, but it doesn't have to. I've so far had Star Trek. I've had Tinder for telemarketplaces. And I've also, in episode 3, had what appears to be a man with a kite attacking him, but he's actually a man with a mortarboard on his head.
Okay.
And a bookcase that was that badly drawn, sorry John, that you had to write bookcase on it for people to recognise that it was one.
I love that.
I like
that
to
mine
think,
might be like that. It's
I like to think that my Dave the donkey does at least somewhat resemblance. Maybe a horse or a donkey, but one of the two. But we'll see. So talking about Dave the donkey joins us, as Dave the donkey always does. He is the mascot. He comes everywhere with me. He comes on our holidays. He's purchased for me some time ago. Well, came with a purchase for my wife some time ago, as I was telling you earlier, and the boot of a car that my wife bought me, which sounds exuberant, but it is a very rusty Ford, so it's not that expensive. And consequence, he had a little tag on him that said his name was Dave. And he was ready to rave, so Dave comes everywhere. For those that haven't watched or listened before, the principle of this podcast, there's no sell. We don't talk about organisations. This isn't a company selling you something. This is just interesting people talking about interesting things. It is not boring nerd pedantry. Related in some form to learning, development, talent, skills, etc. So, standards, and specifically, I guess, learning standards. What do we mean when we talk about standards? What's your view of standards, I suppose?
So a standard is just a way of things working together. We talk about a phrase called interoperability. You're essentially saying this thing will work with this thing, or this solution will work with this solution. Or there's a really big one that I think I put in the notes that you'll probably remember. Were you a VHS or a Betamax household?
Yes. We were... Well, to be fair, we were VHS, but like after the whole VHS Betamax argument, because my dad, he doesn't like to make a decision. He'll wait for the dust. He's not an early adopter, I would have said, at that point in time. So we ended up in VHS, which I think, if I remember broadly, was not the best solution, but the solution that had the biggest marketing budget.
It is the one that survived.
Yes.
So we talk about those kind of situations, because imagine if you couldn't email somebody because their email was different. Well, that was the reality for some point. When mobile phones first came out, you had to have the same kind of mobile phone for it to work. And I had a friend come over a few years ago, and his mobile phone didn't work in the UK because there's even that kind of like interoperability. The standards were different that his mobile phone was based on. But I think when we talk about learning standards, we're talking about a few things. We're talking about how do we build systems, tools, solutions, even just content that would just work with what we have. People think about SCORM, for example. So you might publish a SCORM file, and you're guaranteed pretty much that will work in any learning management system out there. People might be aware of things like XAPIs, where you've got the ability to transmit learning data from anywhere, really, from any system that can transmit it, and have that work in an LRS, have that be able to be reported on, utilised, picked up by the bits of learning. But there's even more kind of esoteric ones, like there are upcoming kind of skill standards. There are all the ones that are used in higher education that people don't really think about, but are actually quite cool in their kind of world. There are kind of HR open standards, so how an HR team should work together, how you should structure people data, how you should think about hiring and firing, how you should go about that. There are standardization groups out there that may not be defining, as we talked about, technical standards, but how you work in our world, how you do people development, how you manage people, and actually have that the same between organizations. So when you move between organizations, it's broadly similar. And actually that's an incredibly useful thing, because without it, we'll talk about this more later, I think, you have to reinvent the wheel every time. You have to work out how we're going to do this. How do we do this in a good way that works, really?
Okay. So you chucked loads of terminology out there, right? So we had SCORM, we had XAPI, we had LRS. Can you explain some of those terms?
Yeah, I talk about this because that's the world I lived in, but SCORM was created, it's quite an old standard, 90s kind of thing, where the Department of Defence...
90s isn't old. Don't make me feel old. 90s was like 5 minutes ago.
SCORM is 30 years old, basically.
Thanks.
And the 90s was like yesterday to us, but I think it's us going to a 90s party is like our parents going to a 70s, 80s party kind of thing.
That's fair.
So we are of that age now.
Yeah.
I think, so SCORM and things like that, so it was created to allow e-learning to work. The Department of Defence were buying lots of e-learning, but it would only work with the provider's tools, with the provider's platform. It wouldn't talk in a similar kind of way. They had no way of saying, this question is like this question, or this interaction is like this interaction. And that was causing a lot of waste, really, because people would buy things and they're not going to work. They're not interoperable, so therefore you're stuck into that one provider's ecosystem. Yeah. XAPI, people say, is the replacement for SCORM. Okay. It's not quite true. There was this whole thing called SCORM 2.0 that happened in, I don't actually remember when that happened off the top of my head, but
2002?
I think it was a bit later than that, but yeah. Okay. I think that 2002 was the third version of SCORM, kind of thing, where people went, essentially people went out to the industry and said, or the ADL, people who run SCORM went to the industry and said, what should SCORM look like? And there are these fascinating papers about what people thought it should look like. But the reality was that SCORM is a paradigm that is limited in its data. People, while it can send more data than what it says, there was no standardization for what that additional data would look like. There's no way of tracking experiences. XAPI is the experience API. So there was no way of saying that rather than completing this, you interacted with this, or we've done work before where you've said kind of like, this person taught this person, or these people did well at this but then badly at this part of their job, therefore how do we bring all that together? And XAPI was designed to allow for that broader experiential data to be tracked. And then weirdly there is a place in SCORM called CMI5, but that is a whole other thing. The whole thing around old aviation training and things. So originally
feels like we're getting to boring pedantry.
Boring nerd pedantry. But the reality was that all those things were created to allow for anybody to buy anything from anybody else, as long as it supports the standard, be it learning, be it content, be it even things like the new skills standards. We talk about skills taxonomies. You can buy standards compliance skills taxonomies off the shelf. Yeah, is that those kinds of things will just work with a tool that supports those standards.
So it's interesting how that, and specifically on that skills one, right? Because this is always still an area that I find interesting. How advanced are those standards at this point in time? Because it's still quite an emerging space for a lot of companies, right? Skills is, I mean, it's not new, but it feels new, in at least in the world of learning. So how established are standards like that compared to perhaps some of the more conventional learning standards around SCORM and XAPI and maybe even CMI5?
The simple answer is they're not yet.
Okay.
Standards take a long time to get together, because essentially what you're saying is you have a load of competitors in our world, any world really, they're competing companies, get together and go, we want to produce interoperable things for the betterment of our market segment, in our world learning, but essentially there are these groups called standards groups and kind of other things like that get together and define these standards, and they take years to define. So the HR standards on skills by the HR people who are doing, I've forgotten the name now, they're not very far along with those really yet. They are defining, a lot of the stuff is still looking at competence-based education, which is slightly older hat, but especially in the HR world and the military world, HR world, in the higher education world, in the military, those are still the standards they're looking at. So those competence-based standards are much more advanced, but the skills ones are still very much an emerging market. And that's a good thing, because one of the problems is when you go too quickly with a standard, you define something that isn't fit for purpose. Okay. When too few people are involved, it's not useful to anybody, so nobody ends up using it. Yeah. There's a great joke that, someone said, it's not a great joke. There's a joke that I find funny, let's just say, where somebody says,
we're all judging you now.
Yeah, this standard doesn't support what we need, so I'm going to create a new one. And then you've got another competing standard. The reality is we want to move slowly in these we want to move at a decent pace, but slowly enough to make sure we have all the requirements in these things and have future-proofed them.
Right, okay, fine. So, I'm going to take XAPI as an example when I ask this question, because this is a space that I've encountered, and this will make you smile, because I've whinged about it plenty of times.
Yeah.
I don't think when we ran a project that we were particularly market leading in wanting to shift to using the XAPI standard as standard for our newly created, internally created or externally sourced content, right? That was the standard we wanted all of our vendors to begin to use, because we felt that we were able to collect a richer set of data from a learning record store LRS in order to do that. The challenge we have discovered, I suppose, is that still a lot of the learning suppliers, be that content creators, be that learning management systems, still see Experience API as perhaps new. Yeah. And at the time, we were like, well, this has been in the market for like 8 years. This isn't new. This is relatively established. So whilst a standard may exist, that doesn't necessarily mean adoption by suppliers and competitors. Yeah. And how do we, I guess, get the market to start picking up on those new standards? Because it's not helpful as an end user, if you like, as an organisation, to say, right, we're gonna set this as the standard we're going to use, only to find half the market like, that's still a bit new for us, and we don't want to invest in that yet.
I think that is a cycle of, you have a cycle there of people not wanting it because people don't provide it, therefore that happens. So I think the only way that providers will support things is by firstly customers saying they want them, and secondly there being a reason to want them. You should never use a standard because it's the latest, greatest thing. That doesn't work, because essentially if there's not a business case behind it, if there's not a reason behind it, if there's not a functional reason, I guess, or a technical reason, or even just we want to do this because we're using it globally. There has to be a really good reason there, basically. Yeah. And often some of these standards, especially the emerging ones, don't have it. As I said, you said XAPI is old now, but it was a bridging standard in something else. You see now people are supporting CMI5, which is the SCORM replacement, because there's a business case for it. It supports that similar SCORM-like data, the quizzing data, the question data, the objectives, the milestones. So to the provider, there's a business case behind it. I am with you though in that the people who weren't using XAPI did annoy me, because I worked for Watershed and Worcester, we kind of created it. But the business case behind XAPI came, as you know, with the analytics that it provided. So while the provider supported it, for example, because we actually worked together on these projects, didn't we?
Yeah.
Not going into who did it, but the providers all supported it, but you didn't have a good business case to use it yet.
Yeah.
You weren't saying, I want to do this because it makes this better or it lets me track this more.
Yeah.
The reality is, I think, and you might disagree with me here, that you were wanting it because it was the latest standard in that kind of way.
I think I sit on the fence on both sides of that.
Yeah.
I think I saw the potential
Yeah, I think
and the
that's a good
potential
point,
business
yeah.
cases in the future.
And we worked on that a lot and got to the point where we had a really good business case for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that exists. I think the challenge we had at that point was we almost had a window of opportunity to effect the change.
Yeah.
And if I didn't do it then,
No.
we probably wouldn't be doing it
No.
full stop.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, I agree 100% was the business case there at that point in time, and I would say no.
Mm-hmm.
Did I see the business case
Yeah.
emerging? Yes. Was I going to get it, was I going to find the money again later down the line when we had a business case? Probably no. So I think that's why we went where we are. But I think coming back to, and I don't want to derail the conversation, but I do have an important thing that I just wanted to talk about, which is Experience API, which is all about understanding the experiences and the way that people are interacting and the longer term evaluation of content and skills, which is again how someone deploys the knowledge that they have, and the way they choose to deploy that knowledge. I think those two coming together I think is the optimum business case for something like an Experience API.
No, definitely.
When you can join learning and two skills and start to really demonstrate not only the difference that the learning has made, but also the depth that someone has gained a skill to and their practical application of that skill. I think that's really interesting.
I think one of the big points is that is the business case there, though, as we're talking about, in that when you look at what the Department of Defence do with XAPI, and it's kind of like they're saying, we have this readiness because we're tracking much more detailed data about the person. We know their skills, their competence and everything else. And actually we can then use that to deploy them in the right places. And that is the business case you're talking about there, very similarly, in that when you have that rich data, when you utilise that data correctly, and you use a standards-based compliance so everything can transmit it, suddenly that is a really good case for an advanced system like XAPI or something like that to do those analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to do a quick mud check and see how we're getting on, and then I wanted to talk about standards, perhaps both from the technical aspect we've been speaking about, but also less technical in things like design standards and stuff, and we can chat about some of my experiences there. So I haven't got very far. That is actually a sun. It does look like a comet crashing into Earth.
I get that.
But it is a sun and some grass. So I haven't yet started Dave. But Dave will appear. He has most of the mug to appear, so hopefully he'll be fine. What have you got so far? You're doing better than anybody else.
I drew a videotape at the moment on here, but it looks a bit like a dodgy VR headset, I think.
Yes, it's a Google headset.
Yeah, one of those cardboard ones.
Google cardboards, yes. It looks like one of those.
And then I've started putting questions on the back about why we might do it. I was just writing standards down. But I am somewhat pleased with my videotape, less pleased with the other side.
I get that. And I'm glad that you've written VHS and Beta on it. At least now I understand it's a tape.
It's not a Google cardboard.
It's not a Google cardboard. Google cardboard. Don't see them anymore. Don't see VR anymore.
That's an interesting one.
But let's see. That's probably a whole different podcast. Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about, I guess, is some of the pushback, some of the conversations that we had when we were trying to introduce less technical standards, but more standards. So, for example, really some key ones, which now I think legally are becoming more enforceable, but things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, which is a really important document, but the most boring thing I think I've read in my life. But also just general kind of design standards that we introduced internally around kind of how you phrase things, the look, the feel, the assets that you can use, all of those. A lot of the pushback we got on both of those from our content designers was the feeling that this was going to kind of stifle their creativity, bring in barriers, get in the way, stop them from designing content in a really exciting and interesting way. which actually I disagree with.
Yeah.
I think it gives them a framework,
Mm-hmm.
creates a better experience for individuals because they're not. The next button doesn't suddenly move from
Yeah.
up there to down there
Yeah.
and over there in every other course, and all of those are quite important things. But what's your view on kind of, I guess, and in both worlds, right, the technical world and maybe more the design world, around standards stifling that creativity or creating kind of challenges for designers or for technical people?
I think it's important to remember that people don't experience standards, especially in disability accessibility, are very interesting. That firstly, they can improve the world for other people. There was a weird Instagram video put up the other day by Scope talking about, it's not weird, it's great actually, talking about how certain things that were put in for disabled people are great for everyone else, like drop curbs when you've got a suitcase.
Yes.
Everyone uses subtitles now. Even things like the crossing types we have on the road, the tactile paving, that kind of thing, are all really useful things. And we've got to have heads in our phones and we suddenly realise we walked up to the road. Well, the tactile pavement's there for a blind person is a really great thing. So when I worked in content creation, there was always that tension between making the cool user experience, but also making it so that everybody can access it. And standards were great at doing that, especially things like WCAG, where you're saying that actually we are accepting that we have a legal responsibility to have everybody be able to access this content, not in necessarily the same way, but have the same access to content in there.
Yeah.
And I think that people may say it stifles them, but the reality is that limitations actually make you more creative in many ways. You can say, actually, this is a really cool interaction, but it has this other way of doing it. It has this built-in accessibility behind it. And WCAG is great with those kinds of rules. I think as well, from a standards perspective, and I wrote this down on the mug, that if you have to reinvent the wheel every time, we would never have cars because everybody would have just given up reinventing that because you'd have to do it every single time.
Yep.
And that would be horrible. So the fact that you can create something, maybe in Storyline or in anything else, any other authoring tool like that, that just works with any LMS is actually an amazing technical thing. And not everything has to be amazing simulations or anything like that. A lot of the time, your creativity, especially doing pedagogical design and doing that kind of thing, is explaining the information in a way that has limitations in the first place. But actually, those limitations make it better because you've had to think about it more. You've had to push it through. You've had to work out what's going on. And as I said, it just works. You have to worry about it not working somewhere. You have to worry. But one of the big things about this looking like a VR headset, VR headsets can support SCORM and XAPI because it just can. It's cool. But then you've got to put VR headsets in every single place you want to do the training. And that's probably not viable in many ways.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that actually your limitation is not just a limitation that limits you because it limits you to be annoying. It limits you because you're a business in many ways. Your resources are not infinite.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that's the thing. It's certainly for things like design standards, right? That meet things like WCAG is it almost takes an element of choice, yes, away from designers. But what I think it opens up to is more creativity to design something interesting, exciting for learners that fits around that, but also allows you to design at speed. If you don't have those templates, for example, right? That standard look, feel, navigation process. Not only is that hard for the learner because they don't know where the hell they're supposed to be going next, all that sort of stuff, right? Every course is slightly different, but also it takes so much time. You start from scratch, you reinvent the wheel. Every time you choose to do something slightly different, it's not fantastic.
One of the great examples of this is the Gov UK website. It's dull as dishwater in its kind of visual appeal, but their rules are so clear and concise and brilliant on how much data should be on the screen. I had to order a new passport the other day, and that used to take like 20 forms, didn't it? It took me 5 minutes. And every step was so clear and instantly available to me, as you say. Every box in the same place. They have rules on the amount of text width that can be on a page and the amount of paragraphs and things, simply to make it so that everybody can access that service. And they've literally won awards. apparently I've never ordered a passport elsewhere, but it's a pain in the bum to do it anywhere else in the world because they don't have that kind of decision around we're going to make this experience simple so that everybody can access it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, and I've not thought about it really, but I think it is a great example. I think that I have more cars than I need. Most of them in various states of broken, rusty, repair. And actually taxing them, just like the simple process taxing. If I think about how how painful that used to be, and now I can do it really quickly. I can take them off the road during winter really easily. And, you don't need X amount of stuff. It's 2, maybe 3 screens. And you're putting in one piece of information in each one, and it's done. It really has actually become an incredibly straightforward, simple process. As you say, is it the most appealing, exciting adventure for us to go on? No, but can I do it? No, do I understand what I need to do and do it very quickly and easily? Yes. And what do business need people to do? It's exactly that, right?
And it's really interesting how the one site that's not gone through it yet is the tax stuff. And that is the site. It's very jarring all of a sudden when you go and you have to do your kind of self-assessment. That system is so jarring because it's so old, and it is old, and it looks they've got like gradients on the background things, and you suddenly get taken out of this world of this is cool, as you said earlier on. It's different, and suddenly you struggle. I struggle definitely.
That's the only reason my wife has a job. Don't improve it. It's all fine. Okay. Fine, thank you. So talking then about the importance and talking about, I guess, stifling creativity versus creating more creativity. Are there times then when you can bend those rules, when you can push that standard or come out of that standard slightly? When can that be done? Should that be done?
It depends who you ask, really, and it depends on what stage of the process you're in. I would argue that when you're prototyping something, when you're playing with something, playing with standards and experimenting with them and seeing how you can push them is interesting. But should you then launch it with that? That is an interesting decision to make. Is that going to cause you problems down the line? If you create a piece of learning that works in your current LMS because it has an expanded fields and things like that, it can take more data in. If you then move to a different LMS next year, will that still work? Is that going to be a problem to you? So standards are there to make the world easier. It may not be easy for you now to follow it, but in the future it can cause you other problems.
I think that your point there about expanded fields is one that resonates. If I think about some of my ex-colleagues and Workday gives you that capability to create lots of custom fields. But of course, the consequence of doing that is you move from Workday to something else. Suddenly, your processes, everything that you've built, has to change as well, right? Because that new platform won't necessarily have that functionality, and that either limits you, so you're stuck with a provider that perhaps you no longer want to be with, but have no choice. Or you rewrite every process that you have because you've built something around a non-standard piece of technology.
But also, if say you buy an LMS that doesn't support something, it'd be ridiculous to buy an LMS. I don't think any LMS doesn't support SCORM, but then some don't support certain versions of it. But then imagine you then go and buy an off-the-shelf piece of content from somebody. You go buy some compliance learning, it doesn't work. You imagine how annoying that would be. How that kind of sits there. And I think from an expanded perspective as well, you've got to think about, is the provider going to keep supporting that in the future? If we make this modification, does it make our lives harder? You talk about Workday. When you upgrade Workday versions, certain custom field types break. Certain custom field types are not supported anymore. When you look at, say, the reason things like Saba, so many people still have on-premises Saba instances, is because they did custom things to them that they don't support anymore and haven't supported for years. And so therefore you're stuck with this older version, this dinosaur of a platform that you can't do anything with anymore, but it's key to your business process in some way.
Okay. So you spoke about prototyping.
Yes.
So explore that and bending the rules of prototyping, right? Because I agree. I think there are opportunities where you can do that, but then that also does leave you open. So we prototyped and we played with effectively, it wasn't VR. It was 360 video, right? But using VR headsets, using Google Cardboard. And we played about with some of that. And there was some really interesting stuff that came out of that. But because we hadn't thought about the standards when we're doing it, specifically data standards, whilst we were pulling some data, actually we hadn't set anything up in the way that we built this to really understand some of the things that later on we thought, actually, this would be great to know, you know, what's happening here, or where their eyes are particularly looking at any given point, right? Because we understand if they're following this piece or if they're looking over there at that bit, and, you know, where is their attention held and what matters and that sort of stuff, or what options are they selecting. And we hadn't done that because we didn't have a standard for it. And so as a consequence, when we chose to do more with that, we ended up having to rebuild a lot of what we'd done because we hadn't thought about the standards at the beginning. But there are other pieces where perhaps I think we have played about with prototyping work and not gone through with it. And perhaps if we had have spent the time doing the standards, it would have cost us more, taken us longer. So it is that tricky balance to find, right, about how much effort you put in at the beginning around standards to make sure that whatever you're going to create, you can deploy. You don't need to rework later, right? Versus something that is, I guess, truly dipping a toe in the water, right? To understand whether you want to invest more.
Yeah, there are reasons why some of the HR people data standards and things like caliper analytics in higher education exist, because their world is so much more, because those things are so much more controlled. In higher education, you are really just tracking someone's knowledge transfer and actually maybe their engagement and their risk of dropping out and that kind of thing. So those in higher education, there are whole analytics frameworks for it that are set down because that's a controlled situation. When you're playing about things, you don't know the situation. Sometimes, as you say there, you can build a business case out of that and then apply the standards later, especially rapid prototyping and rapid tools may not support the standards, but actually, it's cool. I do a lot of work at the beginning with how does LLMs and AI produce content. And actually, things like chatbots and not chatbots, things like agential AI, which is the new big one. There are no standards for how does that interact with various tools. There are upcoming standards that connect them to other things, but the world is moving too fast for us not to use them. So actually, while there are standards like functional calling and MTC that exist for how those systems talk to each other and develop a good chatbot, not chatbot, I keep saying chatbot, agential AI, develop a decent agentic AI product or a tool, those standards are not finalized, they're not firmed up. So actually, prototyping, playing those, you can't use standards for them yet. You've got to kind of be a bit of the seat of the pants, really, on the edge of your seat, kind of just flying with it until those standards are in place. And actually, if we wait till the standards are in place, probably have missed a lot of that early adopter advantage, all of that advantage of getting the business case in place, and we'll be stuck in whatever paradigm the tools providers let us do. The people who produce that for us allow us to use. Really.
Yeah, because and I was going to comment. There's a lot of providers. I mean, it's a bit like a couple of years ago where you couldn't go to a conference without, you know, all of the people telling you how they were working in VR or you know, etc. And now, of course, it's all about AI. But generally, the conversations you have with providers about AI are about producing the same content quicker. Not necessarily really thinking about how learning will transform because of agentic AI and other options. Partly, I think, because for some, if not a lot of the providers, fundamentally makes their product probably a little bit irrelevant in the future. Although not entirely, there's always a space for quite a few of, I think, what's in the market, but it needs a different lens. So those providers, have they got standards that create that interoperability already across, or is that, again, you're locking yourself into a provider by using what they've got now, if that makes sense?
The really weird thing is that to launch an AI chatbot, SCORM is probably all you need. It tells who you are, gives you some other information, and you can have your suspend data. So if you had a previous conversation, what was that about?
Right.
An ID to link to that. But most of them are saying we're not going to do that. We're just going to, our tool just works.
Okay.
And so there are things like LTI in the higher education space that some providers are using, but the majority of them are just going, we don't use standards, just come use our tool, because the vendor lock-in is quite attractive to them.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing we've got to be quite careful of, is that, yeah, if you were going to choose one provider for all this and you put all your eggs in that basket,
yep,
and then it doesn't work properly in the future, or something changes, or you buy a new tool and that isn't interoperable, then yeah, that you're locked in some ways.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. So there's a piece there about, when you're buying, don't get sucked into
No,
that
definitely. Yeah.
shiny.
Yeah.
Ask the difficult questions about practically
Yeah.
what standard are you using? How do I make sure this works with
Yeah.
other things? How do I, if I wanted to shift in the future, how does that work? Or
Yeah.
can it work, or can it not work? Because I think there'll be some interesting and possibly some uncomfortable, not all suppliers, right, but some uncomfortable conversations with some suppliers around some of their answers to some of that.
The things with the AI stuff at the moment, we're moving so fast. There's no chance to put standards in place.
Yeah.
This was an emergent technology less than 5 years ago, and most standards take 8 to 10 years probably to standardize, and the providers have no. There are, as I said, there are some things like what's called M2C and functional calling, which allow different AI providers to talk to each other and things like that. And there are great kind of interoperability tools out there that can allow you to do it, but that is another step, another problem to get that in place, another challenge to put those tools in place, really.
So on that subject, right, so we've spoken about how do we practically apply some of these standards within the workspace and within design and with thinking about kind of purchasing, and decisions and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
How do we manage some of these standards within that?
Yeah. From a making sure providers provide them, I think we have to keep asking for them. One of the things I've done a lot in the past is working with providers to support various standards, because people are saying we have to have this. And it's not we have to have it. It's actually it's not a negotiable. It's that we have to have this because it's important to us, because it means that we can in future do something else if we want to.
Yeah.
Or we embedded this so deeply in our processes and in our thinking that we have to have it.
Yeah.
I think as well, as I said at the beginning, remembering that while to me all of that quite boring, nerdy stuff is important, it is important to everyone as well, because as we've said, it allows for that interoperability, it allows for that compliance when you move to a different provider. It ensures that you have a choice to leave and to move on. You're not stuck in an ecosystem. And as a business, that's exceptionally important. We don't sign non-break 10-year contracts on our tools. So we shouldn't also allow suppliers to lock us in other ways, really. Is that there have been whole court cases there. This, you look at kind of the Microsoft court cases of the 90s and early 2000s, trying to lock people into Internet Explorer. That was an important thing to remember, is that we don't want to get vendor locked in. We don't want to get stuck. We want to make sure that the standards are supported so that we have choice in the future.
Yeah. And you alluded, I guess, to the emerging standards around skills, right? Obviously, there's a lot of money being spent around skills at the moment, and there's a lot of vendors out there supporting skills. So those skills standards will become quite critical, but probably not spoken about necessarily, not have the visibility.
The really interesting thing about the skills standards is because they're still being developed. If they're important to you, you can get involved and you can support that development. You can guide that development work. And that is a thing that most people don't think they can, but those people that develop those skills, they're open bodies. Anyone can go to the meetings. Anyone should be able to go to the meetings. If there's something different, there's something going on there. But also, you can join those, you can help them, you can actually build it all out. When we look at, say, XAPI and the stuff about SCORM 2.0, that was done by people in the learning companies at the time. And actually, the first implementations were done by those people pushing it out to clients. And it's just normal, everyday kind of learning designers, technologists, that kind of things, working in those boards to make sure that those standards work for them. And especially from a skills perspective, a lot of those skill things are being developed by people who are very good, technically gifted, but they're not necessarily doing the day-to-day application of those skills things. So it's important that people get involved in those kinds of approaches to make sure that they are usable at the end of the day and useful to you. If you say this standard doesn't work for me, then you can actually get involved and change that if you want to.
See, I think that's really important, and we'll put a call out on on this, on how you can get involved in some of that, because I think it is critical. So what about the future then? What does we've spoken about skill standards, they're being created. I think that's obviously a critical one. What else do you see coming down the line? What else do you see changing when it comes to standards and that sort of stuff? You know, we've spoken about accessibility standards. There's obviously changes in European law that's now kind of already have written that in as you know, something that has to be done. Is perhaps not quite worded as strongly previously. That's been reinforced. What else do you see changing in the industry that's gonna kind of refocus people's attention on standards, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the emergence of AI is interesting in two ways, in that AI can create content really well, but it doesn't know your context of your data. So actually being able to have standards for providing learning data to AI tools is possibly an interesting emerging point, but also just your existing content pools. There's a lot of tools currently that are saying we are pulling apart these e-learning files and allowing to put chatbots and those kinds of things. So that is quite hard. So I do think there'll be some kind of open content standards that define how content is packaged in the way that can be then parsed and reviewed by AI. I also think from just a general kind of skills perspective, there are some bits of work around kind of open skills sharing. So how do you say, I have this skill? How do you have a verified skill? There's some really interesting stuff around storing credentials and skills in blockchains to allow for kind of completely verifiable, non-editable skills to be said. If somebody has verified you that you can do this thing, it's available to them to go check in the blockchain, the people. And actually, you're already seeing certain universities providing their degree certificates with blockchain backups to them for that reason, which is a bit of a Wild West at the moment because it's not an open standard. But I think there'll be an interesting change in that to become a kind of open general standard.
At some point, we'll be talking about blockchain and others as well, because I think there's a lot in that space which is, it's not, I would say, and people correct me in the chat later, but I don't think blockchain and that end of the space and Web 3.0 is particularly well understood in the learning environment, and actually does have a lot to offer to us, certainly within talent as well, and other areas, which is, I think, quite interesting. So there's another episode will be coming on blockchain specifically. Leadership. So our role, or the role of learning leaders then, what's the role of us in this space, right? And auditing and ensuring that standards are adhered to, they're in place, they're being used, etc.
I think leadership set the tone on this kind of thing. So if you are happy for your content to be not standard supported, then your team will do the same thing. So you have to understand why standardization matters, how it affects your decisions, especially your purchasing decisions, your sign-off decisions, your choice of tools and providers, definitely. But also, as you said from the beginning, having good content standards, accessible design standards, all those kinds of things are a top-down responsibility, not a bottom-up responsibility now. They have to be, you have to set from the top, this is important, and then set the tone elsewhere in your organisation. And I think you have to understand the standards, you just have to know which ones are important to you, and why your team might be saying this is important, why your team might be saying, I need some time to go and join this group defines this thing, or actually your team might say, this tool does this badly, what can we do about this? How can we force this, how can we change this provider to be better at this, really? And actually care about that. It is an important part of how almost your business continuity goes on, as I said, with standards. If you can't change, then you're locked in forever. So
perfect. Okay, so mug reveal then, as we head towards the end of the episode. I'll happily again do mine first. So we have what I like to think now is the end of the dinosaurs comet. I've decided that hasn't changed, and then there is, I think, an orange. Let's be honest, probably me. Stickman. I'm obviously that thin. In the last episode, we did agree that the camera had £6, and I use 6 cameras. So
that's a lot.
fun, yeah. And then Dave. And this time we've got a side-on view of Dave, and
Nice.
I think Dave's doing all right.
I think Dave looks all right in that one, yeah.
Dave's a bit smaller than last episode. He's looking less
Got a
gigantic.
haircut.
He is still the same size as me, which is still disturbing. I'll admit. I could have made myself taller or Dave smaller. I'm not sure which, but we're learning. But it is getting there. So you get to take that mug home. Lucky
thank you.
And what do I get in return?
So I have bent the rules.
Oh, nice.
However, I've
Don't
slightly
get to show
smudged
the people watching.
Oh yes, of course. You probably can't see it. I did it pink is the problem.
Pink.
And we also spoke about reinventing the wheel a bit, so I've put that up there. But I was going to draw a wheel and got bored.
Fine. Okay,
well,
good.
Ran out of time.
Okay.
I think you can enjoy your video.
I will enjoy my video, and I'll enjoy the bent rules. I think that's quite good. So thank you. Okay. So thank you very much, Pete. That does bring us to the end of this episode of the Tricky to Title podcast. Thank you very much for sharing your journey, talking to us all about the love that is learning standards and how they're not boring nerd pedantry. Yeah. They are very important, critical. If something sparked your curiosity, given you an idea, made you rethink how you learn, I'd love to hear about it. You can find myself and Pete on LinkedIn or email me at trickytotitle@gmail.com. We will put a link in the description to how you can get involved with the skills standards specifically. Please do ping myself or Pete if you are interested in other standards, and I'm sure we'll be able to help you. As ever, talk about AI. Always love to talk about AI. Yeah. ChatGPT has written my exit. At some point, I'm going to have to stop blaming it and just accept it as my own. But this is the sign off that we have. So I'm Richard Pedley. Stay curious, stay messy. Don't worry about the title.